Lovers, and welcome to 21 Conversations, the 2021 Greensboro Bound Literary Festival. I'm Brian Lampkin, one of the organizers of Greensboro Bound and a co-owner of Szpara Books. Greensboro Bound is so excited to present to you these 21 conversations, our effort to create something unique and special for our community within the confines of our continued virtual environment. 21 Conversations pays homage to North Carolina's rich literary history while broadening our tent to welcome in voices from outside of our own microcosm of experience. This featured presentation is but a taste of the 52 authors that we have gathered together in a series of delightful, sometimes unexpected, but always edifying conversations. Since our inception, Greensboro Bound has been committed to providing programs just like the one you're about to watch, 100% free to our community. In order to do that, we need the financial support, both big and small, of readers just like you. Please support Greensboro Bound by giving now. The text to give phone number as well as our website are on your screen. A sustaining gift of just $15 a month, or the cost of a single children's book, will help us remain financially solvent throughout the year. I also want to take a moment to thank our sustaining supporters, without whom Greensboro Bound would just not be possible. Our utmost gratitude to the Edward M. Armfield Senior Foundation, the Ruth Lands Memorial Fund, and Arts Greensboro for their continued belief in our vision to bring together readers and writers of all genres, ages, ethnicities, identities, and voices to foster an understanding of writing as a process that allows free expression, deepens critical thought, and helps sustain a culture of inquiry and delight that is open to all. Thank you again for joining us for the 2021 Greensboro Bound Literary Festival. Please enjoy the conversation.
So thank you everyone for coming and joining us. I'm very excited to moderate this conversation with authors K.M. Szpara and River Solomon. We're going to get into it. But first, I will start by thanking you again for attending Greensboro Bound, a literary festival. We really appreciate you being here in this virtual format. Thank you both for attending and being here with us.
Absolutely. It's wonderful to be here.
Yay! River Solomon writes about life in the margins, where they are much at home. In addition to appearing on the Stonewall Honor List and winning a Firecracker Award, Solomon's debut novel, An Unkindness of Ghosts, was a finalist for a Lambda, a Hurston Wright, an Otherwise, formerly Tiptree, and a Locus Award. Solomon's second book, The Deep, based on the Hugo-nominated song by Daveed Diggs-fronted hip-hop group Clipping, was the winner of the 2020 Lambda Award and shortlisted for a Nebula, Locus, Hugo, Ignite, Brooklyn Library Literary, British Fantasy, and World Fantasy Award. Solomon's short work appears in or is forthcoming from Black Warrior Review, The New York Times Magazine, Guernica, Best American Short Stories, Tor.com, Best American Horror and Dark Fantasy, and elsewhere. A refugee of the transatlantic slave trade, Solomon was born on Turtle Island, but currently resides on an isle in an archipelago off the western coast of the Eurasian continent. K.M. Szpara is a queer and trans author who lives in Baltimore, Maryland, with his tiny dog and goofy cat. He is the author of speculative novels such as First Become Ashes and Docile, and a third in 2022 that follows up on his Hugo and Nebula nominated novelette, Small Changes Over Long Periods of Time. They're about cults and trauma, consent and debt, and a horny trans vampire, respectively. His short fiction appears in venues such as Tor.com, Uncanny, and Lightspeed. You can find him on the internet at kmszpara.com and on Twitter and Instagram at KM Szpara. Welcome, welcome, welcome to you both.
Hello, man. Rivers, you've really got to get something in your bio about like a horny character, because it's a long list of accomplishments and not a lot of horniness.
Yeah, that's definitely the missing. I have to say, I hate having to write bios for myself.
Nobody likes it.
But I think adding a horny character will definitely alleviate some of that discomfort.
Totally. Totally. All right, so we're going to jump in with just a quick excerpt from each of your newest works. And so we're going to start with Rivers.
Yeah, hi. So this is, I'm going to read you the start of my forthcoming novel, Sorrowland. And yeah, I hope you enjoy. The child gushed out from twixt Vern's legs, ragged and smelling of salt. Slight he was and feeble as a promise. He felt in her palms a great wilderness. Such a tender thing as he could never be parsed fully by the likes of her. Had she more strength, she'd have limped to the river and drowned him. It'd be a gentler end than the one the fiend had in mind. Vern leaned against the trunk of a loblolly and pressed the child naked and limp to her chest. His trembling lips lay right where the heart-shaped charm of a locket would be, if she'd ever had a locket. So that's how it's gonna be, win me over with lip wibbles, she asked. And though she was not one to capitulate to bids for love, this baby had a way about him that most did not. There was a courage in his relentless neediness. He would not be reasoned out of his demands. Vern reached for the towel next to her. With what gentleness she could muster, and it wasn't enough to fill a thimble, she dragged rough Terry over the baby's mucky skin. Well, well, she said, cautiously impressed. Look at you. Vern's nystagmus and resultant low vision were especially troublesome in the waning light. But when she pulled her baby close, her partial blindness had little impact. She could see him full on. He was smaller than most newborns she'd had the occasion to handle, and had inherited neither her albinism nor her husband Sherman's yellow boneness. His skin was dark, dark, and Vern found it hard to believe that the African ancestry that begat such a hue had ever once been disrupted by whiteness. Lucy had been that dark. Viscous cries gurgled up from his throat, but died quickly on the bed of Vern's skin. Her flesh was his hovel, and he was coming to a quick peace with it. The child was young yet, but his bones were annals of lifetimes of knowledge. He understood that heat and the smell of milk were to be clung to, or else. Vern saddened, knowing such instincts would not be enough to save him. The home she'd made for them over the last few months in the woods was not safe. A stranger, hostile to Vern's intrusion, had declared war. His threats had become increasingly pointed of late. A gutted deer with its dead fawn fetus curled beside. A skinned raccoon staked to a trunk, body clothed in an infant sleep suit. And everywhere, cottontails hung from trees, necks and nooses and feet clad in baby booties. The fiend's kills, always maternal in message, revealed a commitment to theme rarely seen outside a 5-year-old's birthday party. Another girl might have heeded the warnings to leave the woods, but Vern preferred this obvious malevolence to the covert violence of life beyond the trees. To be warned of bad happenings afoot was a welcome luxury. People might have followed Vern off the compound when she'd fled if there had been a fiend there discarding dead animals as ovaries. And that's the beginning of Sorrowland.
That was so beautiful. I have to go next.
Callan, take us away.
All right, I will be reading from First Become Ashes, which comes out on April 6th. There we go. This is just chapter 1. Point of view, Lark, time now. The fence that surrounds Druid Hill is 10 feet tall and made from wrought iron. It encloses the 745 acres the Fellowship of the Anointed calls home. Along the east side of the hill, at the foot of the bridge, resides the only gate. In my 24 years, 9 months, and 3 days, I have never known an anointed one to pass through it. Until today, until Cain. I stand with him and the other anointed. The toes of our boots overlap a red line painted across the road, exactly 50 feet inward from the gate, the fence's weakest point. Across it, fellows gather to see Cain off. They're allowed to cross the line. They have nothing to lose. My fingertips tingle. Head feels light. We shouldn't even be this close. And Cain is going to cross the line, going to cross the threshold of the fence. The back of our hands bump. When I feel his fingers slide between mine, I grip them hard. I know it's an honor to go out into the world. We've trained our whole lives to slay the monsters that have corrupted and influenced those beyond the fence for generations. Cain for 25 years, I for 24 years, 9 months, and 3 days. Isn't that close enough to go with him? He shouldn't be alone out there. Maybe Nova will allow it. We could be each other's strength. Coming through, a body bumps between ours, head turning. Darren looks over their shoulder at Cain as they walk towards the gate as if it were his fault. Their lips purse as they toss their long, loose hair over their shoulders. It falls across their wool shawl and soft flowing dress. I run my fingers over one of the 3 French braids that holds mine back. Darren doesn't wear their hair back. They don't need to. Despite their insistence that we are siblings, Darren and I look nothing alike, not least because they are a fellow and I am anointed. They don't wear denim and long sleeves to protect their limbs from sparring in the woods. Don't require a leather harness to carry weapons and potions. Don't spend hours every day running around the length, strengthening their muscles so they can fight literal monsters. Their days are spent mending and making clothes. Mine are filled with training and the intimacy of the anointed, with fire and sweat and scholarship, with ritual and righteous discipline. The anointed are my real family, and Nova is our leader. She raised us. The fellows who conceived us mean nothing. I don't even like knowing their names. I wish Darren had never told me. That's the beginning.
Yes. Let's jump into it. How would each of you sort of, I hate this term elevator pitch, right? But sort of what's your elevator pitch, right? Of like what this, what your books are about. What's your sort of, maybe a better way of asking this in your own words, or how do you describe what these stories are about for you? Kellen, why don't you start?
Called on first. I guess I get that for reading second.
Right.
And I'm holding the book in my hand, so I have the synopsis here, but I won't use it. But it is about the undoing of a cult from 4 points of view. Wow, couldn't forget that. From 3 survivors and 1 outsider. And those points of view revolve around Lark, who is an anointed member of the cult, raised to believe that he can do magic to fight the monsters that live outside. And after the cult is liberated, betrayed to the feds by his partner, he decides to go on his quest anyway. And he catches a ride with a cute cosplaying nerd who is the only one who takes him seriously. And it's about magic and monsters and, identity and belief and all sorts of stuff.
I throw in love too.
Love. There's sex in it. I mean, it's a Cam Szpara book. I'm going to be talking about consent and agency.
Rivers, how about you?
I don't know. I was actually looking back through old emails and seeing sort of old ways that I've described this book, and it's kind of evolved the way that I've spoken about it. The book hasn't actually changed that much, but the way I talk about it has. So I guess in short, it's about a young woman who, after fleeing from the cult, the sort of isolated religious compound where she grew up, she's pregnant when she leaves, but as you heard in the reading, quickly gives birth. And as she's surviving alone in the wood after fleeing the cult, begins to transform monstrously. Her body begins changing, and she doesn't know what's happening to her. And part of figuring out what's going on is going to mean sort of unraveling her childhood and what happened in the place where she grew up. But also she'll find out it's not sort of related just to this one place where she grew up, but the country, the nation, the United States where she lives, and the world. So yeah.
We're almost I feel like this is too perfect of a pairing, because Rivers and I are friends, and when we were conceiving these books simultaneously but separately, obviously, it was sort of like, you have a cult book too, I have a cult book. When I listened to like the description, it's very like she fled from a cult, whereas like Lark was forcefully ejected from one, and she turns into a monster, whereas Lark was sort of the promise of slaying of monsters. And I love how these two play together.
Yes,
there are amazing parallels. Also, we're both wearing green shirts, so yeah.
Gosh,
another added layer.
Two good queers.
Let's talk about cults. What is it that sort of drew each of you to sort of writing about cults, incorporating cults so prominently, right, in each of your work?
So I'll pop in for an initial response. I was asked, first of all, I have a background in studying theology, and I studied early Christian my studies from college are history and culture of the ancient Near East, and then I did New Testament and early Christian studies. I'm not a religious person, but I am interested in sort of like all the surroundings and the trappings, and I studied a lot of language from them. So it's sort of always on my mind, and I've been a person who's been through various like spiritual and religious incarnations over time. But I was recently sort of asked about how, like, what pulled at my heart about Lark. And part of that answer is that, like, what it feels like to sort of be sold something, to be wanting something more than yourself, like to be a seeker, to be somebody looking for meaning somewhere, and to be given it, and then to have it taken away. So, there's always something sort of alluring about cults. They're micro societies, they're secretive, and they promise things to people that are, in theory, a draw, and yet there's always something sort of darker going on the inside. And I think that applies to multiple areas of life, without needing to explain that too much. So, it stands as a very good sort of emotional set piece for exploring a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. Rivers, how about you?
I think I want to kind of bounce off something you said about the micro society. I think for me, what makes cults interesting is how hard it can be to tell them from mainstream society. And I think one of the reasons, it's kind of like propaganda. It's really easy to recognize propaganda from, say, another country, for example, but we're kind of inured to our own propaganda. We're like, oh, that's not propaganda, that's just the truth. I think that it's beliefs that are really extreme or far outside of the norm. We can easily say, identify, okay, there's some weird hinky power stuff going on there. That's a cult. But we also have weird hinky power things happening in every aspect of our lives and society, from the family and the nuclear family, to schools, to churches, more mainstream churches, and so on. And I kind of wanted to make that link between what we think of as the cult to something that I think, for people who aren't cult survivors, we tend to think of ourselves that couldn't happen to me, or very outside of that, and want to connect those experiences a bit more. But also because I'm drawn to extremes, I think the extremes are kind of where the answers are. It's like, if we take this to the furthest we can go, you know, then we can maybe solve for X a bit better. So yeah, that's why cults. I mean, also, I think I'm not the only person. I think most people are kind of fascinated by, terrified by, and by cults, and this mystery that we can't really quite solve. And one of my questions as a writer, but was also the question of the protagonist, Vern, is like, why does this happen? Sort of what flaw is there in this sort of human condition or our relations that leads to this kind of pain proliferating? So yeah.
Yeah, one of the so the outsider perspective in Ashes is the cosplayer, and he lives in the area near so the Fellowship, you know, all of my books are sort of like written on like alternate future timelines that might exist. And so in this instance, sort of Druid Hill Park has been sold to an individual. It's a big park on a hill in Baltimore, and it's fenced off. So Calvin lives in the area. Everyone in the area knows it's there. And he's, you've seen the documentaries, and they've tried to do flybys and things like that. But he wants it to be real so badly, this thing that like so many people are trying to like sort of escape, and at several instances will sort of like push Lark and other characters in like unhealthy ways so much, because, you know, there's that draw to like if only you could just do this magic spell that would make your friend live. And the other people in the car are like, we do need to go to a hospital. Like, this person is going to die. And it's, you know, sort of like, sometimes you want the thing that's harmful, and that can play out, you know, ripple out through your relationships, and sort of like how we choose to support one another or not.
Absolutely. You know what, I appreciate what both of you have said. And I think something that comes up in both of your work that I think is really worth highlighting is sort of how easy it is from the outside looking in to think, oh, of course, never, you know, Rivers, you just mentioned this, oh, I'd never be in a cult. Like, obviously that doesn't make any sense. But I think what was so fascinating about the way that each of you handled it was sort of getting these folks from childhood, right? And really, I think what was so interesting about the conflict, right, in each of these books is around, it's like, that process of beginning to challenge the things that we learn as kids and are told repeatedly, right, by the people we think of as important, the people we think of as responsible for us, you know, people we may or may not think of as people who care about us, right, are telling us are true about the world, about ourselves, you know. And so I think that what also really stood out to me about sort of each of the cults in this book, and I don't know that it's necessarily that this time is so different, but maybe it seems bigger, that it's like, I think there's a part of that escapism, right? That it's like society broadly defined, right? Large scale macro society, as opposed to these micro societies, is broken, right? And so it makes sense, right? That maybe it's like, we're just gonna buy some land and live on a hill and just do whatever we want, because it's like, why not, right? You know, and I think, you know, Rivers, in your book, right, the focus of the cult being, you know, particularly like a Black liberation cult, right? You know, again, right, makes so much sense. It's like, yeah, like when do you just sort of tap out, right? It's like, okay, like this society is like not built for me, it's not for us, like we're just, you know what, we're gonna do our own thing, you know? So tell me a little bit about sort of what pushed you to sort of approach sort of shaping, right, the narrative around the cult sort of in that particular way?
So one thing I was watching a documentary maybe a couple of years ago, maybe longer, maybe less long. I don't know, what is time in COVID, who knows?
That's right.
And they were interviewing this leader of this cult, who the cult leader is now in jail, but someone was interviewing him, and all of the questions that all of the ways that he answered the questions, I was like, that's true. Like, nothing you are saying is a lie, nothing you're saying is wrong. And like but it was so surreal, like sort of seeing him surrounded by all of these sort of young adolescent girls who were just like hanging on his every word. And I just, that contrast, that tension between this manipulation and this abuse of power, but also while selling something that was, I don't know, it really sort of broke me. I was like, how do you combat this? How do you fight this? Like, yes, and I wanted to make sure that almost everything that was said or argued by my cult in the book was, you know, it was something that could make someone nod their head, that could feel true. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I look back at my own childhood and my own upbringing and the things that I believed, you know, because that's just, you can't fight it. You can't, and, you know, it's not like you hit, you know, 16 or 18 or 21, and then like suddenly that's just like, oh, I'm over that now. I disavow that. And I've seen the light or whatever. It's like this constant process. And we also, because like, as you said, that we know this ain't it. Like this, the world that's around us, it's like, you know, it leaves a lot to be desired. So I don't know. I don't really have anything super coherent to say, except that these were the types of things I was more wrestling with than trying to like necessarily like shape any sort of anything in particular. I'm not sure that I have like all of the conclusions. Like, I don't know. I mean, what are we supposed to do?
It is, this is why like I feel like unlearning is such an interesting topic, because we spend our whole lives sort of going through this process of learning. You know, you go to school, you go to whatever, you know, spiritual or religious place, you go to family places, you go to extracurriculars, and everyone is teaching you things. And I feel like you do definitely reach a point where like that sort of like self-awareness as an adult like starts to kick in. And like you have it when you're a teen, a little bit, I think, but then, you know, how do you break free from something when nobody's there pulling you out of it? Yeah. Right? It's sort of like doing it on your own. You have to see the cracks by yourself and pick them up from things that you've heard from, you know, other like from media and other groups of people, like, and friends that you meet along the way. And I'm very interested in people unlearning things. And so one of the things like, I mean, I also was not really interested in like giving point blank answers in my book. And, you know, a pet peeve of mine is like, so I remember I watched Bridge to Terabithia. I haven't actually read it, but I watched it when I was a bit younger. And at the end, it was like Terabithia was like a place in the woods. And I was like, what? Just got away from those characters? Like, and, you know, sort of like in these stories where a character has gained power in like a fantasy or imaginary or other kind of fantastical way, and then that is sort of like taken from them at the end to say like, oh, well, this wasn't real, or this was put on you by other people. I wasn't interested in taking that for my characters, and I wasn't interested in validating an abusive cult leader either. So like trying to find where that like gray space is in between, like how can I give them new power that both comes from what they learned and what they unlearned.
Absolutely. You know, I think that too, one of the, I think maybe nice things around sort of these cults, right, as you sort of frame them, is that there is sort of always this sort of coercive person at the top, right, which sort of like trickles down into some of these other things, right? And so, you know, each of your cults, right, were run specifically by an individual, right, who we learn, spoiler alerts, right, are like bad intentions, right? Who knew?
Wow.
Turns out, yeah, you know, neither of you picked a benevolent cult leader, right, to write about it, you know. And so, but I also think that something that really came through thematically for me in both of the works, right, is the impact that coerciveness has on like bodily autonomy, right, and control. And so I think each of your books really wrestles with this concept of, abuse and consent and intimacy. And so I want to talk a little bit more sort of about that, and so Vern sort of flees, right, what she has come to see as, it's like, I don't know if what he's saying is true or not, but I know that it is not working for me, and then I'm ready to be gone, right? Whereas, Lark spends the vast majority, right, of the book feeling entirely pulled outside of his comfort zone, right, and wanting very desperately and at times violently, right, to get back there, And so when we think about this idea of, sort of the abusive nature, right, of that sort of coercion, so like I don't even know what my question is, right? But like, maybe it's just let's talk about the abusive nature of coercion.
Yeah, actually, I'm now thinking about, and this is related to Kellen's book, in the same documentary that I was watching about the cult leader I just referenced. There was a boy, maybe 16, and his parents had fled the cult and they'd come back to save him. But he and I think his sister did a hunger strike until they would be allowed to return to the cult. Sorry, just thinking about that. So even though Vern flees and she knows that something's wrong with this place, she knows that it's not right. She feels that deeply in her gut. But that doesn't mean that she's sort of beyond everything that she's learned, everything that she's been taught. It still has immense power over how she is and how she thinks, and her self-view. I mean, she's dealing with. I don't think that it's a spoiler to say that she kind of, hates herself, and a lot of that is because of things that she's been taught about herself and how she's been taught to see her body and how she relates to people and so on and so forth. And one of the huge themes in this book, I guess in every book I write, is queerness. Vern is gay, another spoiler, and sort of reconciling. I think that I think there's a part of her that has always believed that this is right and there's nothing wrong with this, and there's another part of her that can't escape the words of that she's heard growing up. And I think that we all sort of, when sort of negotiating intimacy, when negotiating power and all of every relationship between two people or three people or however many people or groups of people is always going to have some sort of power, not necessarily differential, just a power relationship. And what does that mean? And and when you deal with people who've been abused and who've had their boundaries and autonomy and agency violated, sometimes an act of any act that you do becomes, I guess, corrupted by that past in a way that it isn't actually corrupted, but it feels corrupted, and it makes you question everything. I don't know. It's sad stuff. It's hard. It's really hard living in this society. I'm just gonna say that.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
When I think of lots of my peers promoting their books, they're always like, there's lasers coming out of sharks' eyes and dragons. And I'm always like, God, all the stuff I want to talk about is really heavy and sad. So I guess put some birds on the cover because they're pretty. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about sort of relationships and bodily autonomy. I'm going to talk about sex a little bit in my book. So the anointed are not supposed to have sex. They wear chastity devices, and we sort of see through. So Lark's point of view is from the liberation of the cult forward, and Kane's point of view, his partner, is takes place in the past. It's sort of Kane's story while living there through betraying the cult, which is also not a spoiler. It's in the copy.
That's
so. So, they have scenes where sort of like they are putting on these chastity devices for the first time, and Lark, it feels good and liberating. That's something he believes in, he wants to do. But for Kane, it is terrifying because he doesn't fully sort of like understand. I don't mean understand to imply that that's good. Like, he doesn't understand why their leader would think that this is a good move for them. If he loves someone, why can't he be with them the way that he wants to? And so like, one of the things that sort of like ultimately like pushes Kane out of the cult is, he is he is abused and violated in a way that it is sexual in nature because it has to do with his body, but like it's not for a like sexual encounter, so to say, like of that nature. And when he sort of like hears that Lark is going to do something similar, probably, it's one of those like, okay, you hurt me, but now you're about to hurt this person that I care about. But Lark is like, do not come. I want to do this. And the point of view is Kane sort of like watching this unfold. And Lark would describe that in the moment as sort of like a consensual sexual encounter. And actually one aspect of it is violated towards the end of the scene where they're not supposed to climax, and the person he is with sort of pushes him to, and he tells the cult leader and she kicks that person out. Like, and so like, it's one of those things where like within the scope of the cult, like protocol has been followed and everything was like sort of negotiated and handled appropriately, like when things, went wrong. But, once you are presented with the fact that like your premise for operating on all this is false, it can color your past experiences and color your future ones, like Rivers was talking about.
Absolutely. I think that Kellen, that part of the book was really, I think, in some of the ways, one of the most heartbreaking for me, right? Is because, again, from the outside looking in, you can tell how like coercive this is, right? Because we have the privilege, right, of distance and having not grown up, right, like under this belief system, right? And so we can see that it's like, this man is not here to help you, right? Even though that's what he said, he's actually here for his own gratification, right? And ultimately to harm you. And so I think I think what you're both really talking about here, right, is sort of the perpetual message, right, that your feelings, the people that you're attracted to, the way that you love, the way that you would like to express that love or express yourself, right, within relationship is wrong, and then really these characters sort of wrestling, right, throughout the books, right, with trying to reclaim, right, that autonomy of saying like, it is entirely okay for me to express myself, right, in a way that is consensual with my partner, right, whoever I choose that partner to be. Does that sound right?
I can't speak for Rivers, obviously. Yes, for myself. I won't spoil like the sort of final sexual encounter of the book, but it's like between Calvin, the cosplayer, and Lark. And it surprised even me when I got to it, because I was like, yeah, we're gonna do it now and it's gonna be good. Everyone's happy about it. And then I was like, wait, there are unresolved feelings and we need to deal with this. I'm gonna choreograph this sex scene to fit with that.
Yeah.
Rivers?
I'm now just thinking about, I'm cataloging the sex scenes in my book, and to know more, just kind of thinking about them and what they mean. But one thing I guess that strikes me is how when you're in something, it's really hard to see it objectively. And I think when your consent has been violated, but within a certain mechanism, you think that you're doing something with consent or with, how does that, it's kind of mind blowing. Like, how do you know at any time, what is the truth, Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just like seeing that like GIF now.
I mean, I'm 100% with you. I feel like this is just what, you know, we as humans and also our characters within their worlds, you know, we live in these sort of like you know, arenas where you don't fully know what you like and what's true to yourself when there are so many other influences on you at all times. I think back to like, you know, being a teen and like growing up and like some of the relationships that I had along the way. And it's like, wow, that was a bad one. And you don't know that when you're there. And afterwards you're like, that was bad. Current me is like, what are you doing? Like, you would see that because you're in it, which is exactly what you said, you know, you know, how long do we live before we stop looking back 5-10 years and saying, gosh, that was me, I did that? Will I in 10 years be like, whoa, 35-year-old Kellen was not doing it right?
Right. I think that is actually, you know, it's funny. It's one of the things that is like honestly kind of unsettling, right? If I think we sort of sit in this too long, right? Is that the importance of time and experience and understanding the past, right? And so, you know, in the moment, it seemed very normal, right? But knowing what I know now, I'm concerned. You know, and so I think Helen, your point too is sort of related to that, which is sort of, you know, do I know that things are good right now? Right? Am I gonna, you know, 4 years from now, I'm gonna be like, what were you doing? Right? You know, yeah. I think in addition, you know, so we'll shift slightly lighter and talk about gender diversity. And so I think something that was really, what I really appreciated, right, sort of about both of your work is that they featured some gender diversity and some sexual identity diversity as well. And unlike many stories, like that was not the central point of conflict, right? That each of you, even around, so your worlds are rife with conflict, right? Like people are getting like eaten, you know, like people are getting stabbed, right? And burned with fake, like bad things happen, right, to these characters. But that's not one of the conflicts, right? And I think that that's, well, say what I think. I guess I'd like to hear sort of how important, right, do you feel like it was to sort of create these worlds, right, where, so I'll use your work, Kellen, as an example, right? So the introduction of name and pronouns, right, is commonplace within the fellowship, right? And so like how, maybe I'll ask it a different way. At what point in the process did you make those decisions, right, when you were writing? You know, did you sort of write sort of everything and then go back and sort of say like, you know, this could use some more of this, right, and add in? Or did you start from the beginning, you know, and sort of say like, this is the kind of story that I'm interested in telling. This is the kind of world I'm interested in creating.
I have, it's interesting. So being a trans author means that like, as well, for me personally, it's like my sort of like gender identity like has never stopped growing and evolving over time, and publishing is too slow to like keep up with me. So like as seen by like I sent you like an updated bio like 10 seconds before this started being right. my pronouns, I want to spell that one differently, you know, things like that. So when I start like as my books are coming out, they're not necessarily like you know, they're not as queer and trans like as I sort of like feel at any given moment. So this was one of the first opportunities where I was like, okay, I'm gonna put it, it's not about a trans character, because like I'd conceived of and like started the story years and years ago, and that would have altered the themes and I would have had to rewrite it again. Editor would not have liked that, but like, you know, I wanted to incorporate that sort of into the world building. And you know, like because it's a cult and it's small, they all know each other. So if you had a new way you wanted to express your gender or something like that, you could update people. But they don't have to necessarily like do the sort of like ongoing introductions. But when Lark like goes out, he's like in a hotel where he's being kept for questioning, and he picks up the phone in the hotel and they're like, "Hi sir, how can we help you?" And he like hangs up. He's like, "Absolutely not." Like, even though that is the honorific that he would have chosen for himself, the fact that somebody he doesn't know just like said it at him, he was like, "How dare you make this assumption? Bold of you, you don't know me." And like, he comes from a place where, you know, one of the alluring parts of the cult like is that like people can sort of grow and become themselves there, and there's that sort of like intimacy and self-knowledge is like allowed. So when he's on the outside, he almost treats it like aggressively to other people. He'll be like, "You didn't tell me your whatever, like how do I know, and how dare you assume about me?" So I thought it was sort of like a thing that I could throw in as if it wasn't a lot of work, but like a thing that I threaded into like sort of the world building, because you know, it's important to me that people be able to sort of express themselves and be called upon properly. And also I sort of love just like throwing in that sort of like uh brass trans moment of being like, "How dare you assume," you know. It's just a like, anyway, so but my stuff has gotten like sort of more like incorporating it has begun to incorporate more and more of this as it goes, but it's always going to be sort of like a couple years behind where I am as a person sort of like at any given time. So
yeah. I have to say that when I got to the part in the book where I don't even remember who he was talking to, but the person introduced himself and his response is like, "Oh, you don't have pronouns?" I like laughed out loud. It's just like so affronted.
And I think that was from Calvin's point of view, and Calvin was like, "Oh my God, I'm so embarrassed." Like, which is, I really quick, like, I call this my my trans superpower, which is like, if I am in a place where I feel relatively safe and somebody has said something to that would in other circumstances make me feel embarrassed, I will tell them that's an inappropriate question to ask someone, or like, "Why would you do that?" Because I've sort of like I've gotten this like clarity where I can in the moment sort of put it back onto them, like the inappropriateness of their actions, which is a thing I can't always do and couldn't always do. But Lark can do that because he thinks he's a chosen one who can do magic and will stab people. So he's got a lot of power.
Rivers, how about you?
Yeah, I think for me, like, I'm very queer, my life's very queer, my social circle is very queer. It's all very messy, and there's like lots of question marks. So it just felt natural. It's to include that, you know, and even saying it like that makes it things like, oh, it's something that I like added, or what, it's just like, that's just how they sort of came to be. Like when somebody like exists in my head, as a character, it's like, they're usually intersex, or they're usually trans or non-binary, and so on. It's just like how they arrive, because that's how I have arrived. And yeah, I don't know. I think I did have some fun. Actually, a question that I had, gosh, it was very early, it was maybe a year ago now, that I had in an interview from my first publisher. He asked, you yourself take at the time they them pronouns, but I know all of your characters are she her characters. Let's talk about that. I was like, I don't know, but I think to speak to sort of Kellen's point of you as the author, the person, the queer self being much more fluid and changing and ever developing than the characters in the book, or the book itself, is definitely true. But also, this is the first book where I think that I've lost my point. The characters that the Vern, she makes a decision to not assign her children a gender. And that was that was, and I bring that up because that was actually like, that was a decision I made, or like I had a crisis about, is this too much for fiction, you know, right now? And where, you know, it came to the point where I was typing it up and I was like, I can't do this. I can't assign this baby a gender. It's like, but is that, you know?
I know the feeling secondhand because like I know so many people who are having children right now, and most of them are cisgendered heterosexual people, and I'm like, the idea that I would call your baby a gendered pronoun is like fighting me on all of my like deep like seated gender feelings. Like this baby is a potato, like it has no it doesn't have gender yet, you know, and like
yeah.
I just
And what was interesting in the book, and I feel like this is something I do, I've skirted around pronouns in books. Like I don't think I've had a character, I had one character use they pronouns in my first book, and it was a small character and like kind of basically one scene. And I was definitely like, oh, this is slightly trickier for me writing this. And I had a trans character who I feel like the right decision would have been to change the pronouns mid-book, but I ended up not doing that. So I sort of chose, I guess, the like easy sort of clarity of, you know, people, it's easier when things are same. And so I did that again in this book, cursed myself, but also I argued it was within the context of the character. So Vern uses he pronouns for the children, because I think in her mind, that's the gender neutral pronoun, and hasn't, you know, has lived in a very sheltered and doesn't have an idea of like they or whatever. But it's like, did I just do that because it was easier to write he pronouns like in this particular context?
Yeah. This is one of those, like, this has been put on our brains, and are we writing this because we really feel it, or are we writing it because, yeah, you see it as the default pronoun and that kind of stuff? I mean, I'm gonna jump, I'm gonna do like the smallest of sort of like teasers isn't the right word, but I'm revising my third book right now. By revising, I mean totally rewriting it.
As is often the case.
I know. It's a follow-up to my a novelette about a gay trans guy who's bitten by a vampire, and his body changes differently than cis vampires. And he meets another vampire, and this vampire actually two, and they have replaced the first. This was a thing that I was going through while I was writing it too. So I've sort of changed he, him to be he, HIMME, to sort of express that like being femme is integral to my gender. Even though I identify as binary, I don't think I identify as like the same binary as I know other people do. So like these vampires are using vim and ver, as opposed to, you know, he, him, and she, her, not because they don't identify sort of like as like binary, but their genders are like shaped by living for hundreds to thousands of years and experiencing like different cultures and time periods, and like that's different than human binary genders, like, even, you know, and that's not even touching on like non-binary genders. So like but like, you know, I think it's really interesting how we can sort of put how our identities play off of texts that we're working with, like sort of at any given time.
I think the thing for me that I really appreciate is one of normalization. And I think you sort of hit on this in two different ways. And so first, I think in your work, it's the normalization of difference. And the normalization, I think there are moments, right, in each of these works where your characters had to provide a level of corrective feedback to someone, right, about one of these points. And I think what actually really stood out to me as interesting and unique and necessary and important is that the character was just like, you're right, I'm sorry. Right? It didn't turn into like, oh, but like, you know, the Bible said, right? Or whatever, right? Wherever we're going to take this. I mean, it was just like, you know, so there are moments in the story where people ascribe a gender to the children, right? In Sorrowland. And Vern says, they're children, right? And I distinctly remember, I was like, oh, we're here for a fight. But then I remember the character just sort of being like, okay, right, you have great children, right? And so I appreciate that normalization. And I think the other thing that each of you are talking about is normalizing that it's okay to assume that characters are not like straight, white, cisgendered, heterosexual, you know, that there's a normalization. And, you know, Rivers, I appreciate what you said is, you know, all my characters are queer, right? Like all my characters intersect, like all my, you know, and Kellen, you said the same, right? It's like, these are, you know, this is what we're going for. And so I think what I appreciate there too, right, is the normalization that it's like, yeah, you know, we made all of these things up, right? Like, why do they need to fit in any particular box?
It's funny because when I realized this while I was starting to work on something new, that like I always queer almost an entire cast on like one generation level, and then like all the parents will be cisgender, heterosexual, like monogamous, and I'm like, why am I doing that? Like, is it because that's my like personal experience, or because like just the way like sort of the youth, you know, is sort of like sort of branching out, and like who are the people reading my books? I don't know. And I now have to try like actively not to do that, because I'm like, people have queer parents, like queer elders and queer adults. I'm the adult now, like I'm 35, so like yeah. You know, older than almost all my characters. So like to think that like people my age and older wouldn't be so, I mean, that's a challenge that I face, like sort of going forward, is like breaking myself out of that, you know, because I have so many experiences with people who are older than me. And I didn't get to meet a lot of sort of like queer, like elders in my community. So I almost always ascribe like this sort of generational difference.
Yeah. I think it was also just, you know, to one of the interesting things about the characters was that I feel like I had to constantly remind myself while I was reading Sorrowland that Vern is a child. And I had to constantly remind myself while reading First Become Ashes that Lark is an adult, kind of, right? Because there were times I was like, oh, honey, and I was like, he's 25. He's like a grown man. Yeah. So I appreciate that. So I guess as we're getting ready to wrap up, I would spend literally the rest of the day talking to both of you about all these things. But as we're moving towards wrap up, who in each of these books would you say are your like favorite? Who are your favorite characters?
Oh, Rivers gets to go first.
I'm literally so obsessed with Vern, the protagonist. She's so cool. She's so strong. She's like, I think I am a person who really, really appreciates like this sort of spirit of rebellion, of being sort of ornery for ornery's sake, you know, and that's her, and I love it. And then I also love Gogo, who I don't think has come up at all in this conversation. And I love both of Vern's children, Howling and Feral. So I don't know. I mean, I made these characters, so it's like I made them to be, you know, yeah. They hit my buttons. So.
Yeah, I mean, I have 4 point of view characters. I didn't mean to have that many when I started, but like they just were necessary as they came up. I try not to make too many plans, because then I have like created 6 people and need to make up 6 storylines, which I don't want to do. But you know, each of my point of view characters has at least something in them that like I strongly identify with, whether that is a good piece of me or a bad piece of me. You know, I really try to aim for sort of like emotional truths in characters. So, you know, I love Calvin, the cosplayer, who like sort of comes off as like the lighthearted character, because he's like making jokes. In like his opening scene, he's like, I'm cosplaying as like hot elf daddy Thranduil, and like it's funny because everyone else is taking this very seriously, And he's like, sure, I've got like a hatchback and we can stop at like KFC. And like, you know, one time I cosplayed as sexy Colonel Sanders, like, you know, but then he's sort of thrust into this seriousness. And for me, what I love about him is that sort of ugly drive that I like mentioned earlier, where like he just wants so badly for this like magic to be real. And you know, I put myself in that place a lot. Like, I think lots of people read books because they want very badly for something else or somewhere new, or to, you know, be with those characters or be in those spaces or have their abilities. And, you know, that was definitely a reason why I read sort of like growing up. And, you know, it pushes him to sort of like do things that hurt people sometimes. And obviously I would rather that not happen, like as a person who knows better, but I also have like a deep sympathy for him to sort of like be in that position where what you've desperately wanted like your whole life is right there and people are telling you that you can't have it. So, I mean, I do love all my babies, just like River said, you know, and Lark is, you know, he undergoes like a very sort of like personal journey, and I just adore that he doesn't let people tell him that he's wrong, and that almost like pig-headed insistence that like you know, he has to look into himself and see the cracks, and that's really hard. And so, you know, when I write people like unlearning things, I always see myself there and like reach into some of like the really hard unlearnings that I've had to do like over the years. So I think those two characters like really sort of speak to me the most.
Yeah, I would agree. So Howling and Calvin would be my personal choices. Howling is hilarious to me in every scene that he is in. He's just so much work. He's just so much work.
You're in it for the fun characters, as you.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And you know, I think with Calvin too, I think that, you know, I'm kind of averse to this idea of the likable character, right? And so I don't know that I'd say that I like Calvin, although I think I grew to over time, right? I think that he provokes the most emotional, you know, emotion in me. Right. There are so many times I'm like, Calvin, what are you doing? Right. It's like, I get why Lark is doing this. Like, what are you doing here? Like, why is this happening? And so, you know, but I agree. I think that we all find ourselves in those moments where it's like, I need to be a part of this, right? Like whatever this thing is. And maybe there's some evidence to suggest that this isn't really something that I should be a part of, or that would be good for me to be a part of, but that doesn't matter, right? Like I need this. And so I think that just sort of resonates, you know, with me, and I hope it will resonate with other readers as well.
Yeah, you always see people online saying like, I really want like messy, terrible, queer characters. And then often they get them and they're like, no, not messy and terrible like that. And I'm like, what is that even supposed to mean? Like, this is what people are like. Just because people aren't saying it out loud, you know, just because they're not expressing it in front of you, doesn't mean that they aren't thinking like, I would rather do this thing that like hurts a person so that I can have my way. Yeah. Like that's, you know, doesn't discriminate based on our like sexual orientation or gender identity. Like people are messy and terrible. And, you know, I like when people give me that, you know, bring me your messy and terrible, like show me how they, you know, grow and evolve, whether that is for better or for worse.
I love that. Okay, let's wrap up. So tell us, what are you up to these days and where can we find your work? So Rivers, why don't you start? What are you up to?
I am currently working on, I would say my next book, but it's like my next books. I have several different projects that I am very torn between, but I have one thing, I guess that's my main partner that I'm working on right now, that I don't want to say too much about because it's still very early. And yeah, I don't know, I'm just writing, trying to survive. really, really like missing society, which I never thought I would say. But it's like, I'm just looking at society very longingly right now, wanting to like go outside, meet people. So that's me right now. I don't know. That's kind of a boring answer, but that's.
No, it's a real answer.
When does Sorrowland come out?
Yeah.
Oh yes, and Sorrowland is coming out 4th of May, May 4th, Star Wars Day.
Nice.
In the US, yeah. So that's exciting. I'm super pumped for it. It's always so long between like I wrote the book and people get to read the book. So it's just like, come on.
That's right.
Yeah.
Ellen, how about you?
Well, speaking of rejoining society, like I moved while in quarantine. So like I am in a neighborhood that it's not, 2 minutes drive from my old neighborhood, but like I haven't gotten a chance to explore it yet at all. I want to eat in some of these delicious restaurants. Things I've been up to, I got 3 jobs right now, one of which is the one that pays me an annual salary. The other one is revising my trans vampire novel, which will be out in 2022, hopefully, if it doesn't get pushed because I'm taking so long to revise it. And the third one is promoting my book, First Become Ashes, which comes out April 6th. Other than that, I'm taking refuge in video games, and I just adopted a cat. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on in the Szpara household that is just me, just one person here. So
that's good.
So yeah, I can't wait until I can see Rivers again in person in some venue. I miss you so much.
Yeah. Someday.
I know. Look through the screen.
My hug.
I know. Anyway, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this again. I love talking with you both. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your work with us and sharing yourselves with us. So again, this was a conversation as a part of Greensboro Bound, a literary festival. And so we're so excited for you to participate as an audience. We're so excited for you to participate as authors. So thank you all very much and have a great day.
Thank you again for joining us for 21 Conversations. If you enjoyed this presentation, please like and share with your friends and fellow readers. One final reminder that Greensboro Bound is a nonprofit organization committed to bringing together readers and writers throughout the year at zero cost to our community. Please help Greensboro Bound maintain that commitment with a sustaining or one-time gift now. The number to text to give and our website are on your screen. Thank you. We look forward to seeing you in person next year.